After d4, black's most common defense is d5. Let's take a look at some popular alternatives for black.
Black does not always play d5. Another way to prevent white's plan of playing e4 on the next turn is knight to f6. White still wants to play c4, controlling more space in the center before playing knight to c3. After e6, white plays knight to c3, threatening to play e4 on the next turn. Black can now play bishop to b4, pinning the knight to the king so it cannot support e4. After bishop to b4, this opening is known as the Nimzo-Indian defense. Notice after only 3 moves, black is ready to castle. White often plays e3, preparing to play bishop to d3 and e4. One way for black to continue is with b6, so that after bishop d3, black can play bishop to b7, adding another defender to the e4 square and threatening the unprotected g2 pawn. After knight to f3, both sides typically castle. Now that the knight on c3 is unpinned and can help control the center, black usually plays bishop takes c3. And after b takes c3, black doubles white's pawns on the c-file, but also gives white the 2 bishops. Black will enjoy a positional advantage with the better pawn structure, while white will try to open up the position and attack with the 2 bishops, so both sides have good reasons to look forward to the middle game battle. Another way for white to play against the Nimzo-Indian is with queen to c2, protecting the knight, which prevents black from doubling white's pawns on the c-file. Notice that the queen also supports e4, so one common idea for black is to play d5. Black gains a fair share of the center and makes it difficult for white to safely play the move e4. Play can be similar to the queen's gambit declined. Sometimes, black does not prevent white from gaining more space in the center with e4. After g6, black fianchettos the bishop to g7 and plans on counterattacking white's large center. After knight to c3 and bishop to g7, this opening is known as the King's Indian defense. Black builds up a solid defense for black's king once it castles kingside, and notice that the bishop on g7 is already pointing at the d4 square. Black will aim to attack this pawn, as we will see. After e4 and d6, black prevents white from gaining too much space with e5 and also prepares to play e5 once black castles. After knight to f3, castles, and bishop to e2, black can play knight b to d7, preparing to play e5. After white castles, black strikes in the center with e5. This is black's main counterattacking strategy in the King's Indian. Black is ready to capture on d4, which will strengthen the dark-squared bishop's ability to attack on that diagonal. If white grabs more space with the typical d5, notice that once the pawn on d4 moves, the c5 square is no longer protected. Black can take advantage of the space left behind with knight to c5, joining the other knight in attacking e4. After queen to c2, developing the queen and protecting e4, we can see the main ideas of the King's Indian. White has more space and will try to grab more queenside space with b4. Black often will try to slow white down by playing a5, but black's main idea is to attack white's center with c6, and once the knight moves from f6, play f5, attacking the e4 square and setting up a kingside attack. Another opening similar to the King's Indian in allowing white to play e4 is the Gruenfeld defense. The Gruenfeld starts after black plays d5, attacking white's c4 pawn and allowing white to take over the center with c takes d5, knight takes d5, and e4. Why does black allow white to take over the center so easily? Like the Nimzo-Indian, black is going to create a pawn weakness after knight takes c3 and b takes c3. Although the c3 pawn protects d4, it is also a weakness because it can only be defended by pieces and not pawns. This will become a target for black. after bishop to g7, black's bishop lines up with the d4 and c3 pawns on the long dark square diagonal. After knight to f3, black plays c5, the key Gruenfeld move. Black allows white to gain a strong center in order to attack it. Notice white cannot take the c5 pawn because then black would play bishop takes c3, regaining the pawn and forking the king and rook. The plans for both sides in the Gruenfeld are clear. White will defend the center and at some point push the central pawns up the board, trying to create a passed pawn. Black will continue to place pressure on white's center, especially the d4 square. Gruenfeld games can often be very tactical, where one false step can end the game quickly. One more opening that is seen from time to time is the risky Dutch defense. Black plays f5, controlling the e4 square. This opening is considered very risky because it does not develop a piece and opens up black's king on the e8 to h5 diagonal. Black hopes to gain a kingside attack and is willing to risk king's safety in order to attack. A simple way to handle the position for white is to play g3. In the Queen's Gambit, we mention white's light-squared bishop usually develops to the d3 square to enjoy the open diagonal. Notice that f5 blocks white's bishop if it tries to move to the d3 square, so white will often place the bishop on the long light-squared diagonal h1 to a8. After knight f6 and bishop to g2, white will simply castle kingside when black's weakened king position may cause trouble in the middle game for black. Now that you've learned many of the common d4 openings, it's time to test your knowledge.